Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge.
Hi, this episode is for leadership and how you are managing to navigate business conditions which are much more volatile, less predictable. You're needing to collaborate across generations to develop next best steps forward, and without the time or the information to make definitive decisions. In this new environment, you can only be more vulnerable as a leader, and yet still needing to empower your teams inclusively to be able to make more decisions, to stimulate their innovation and reward their efforts. How are you showing up for your teams and for your colleagues? How are you seeking out and giving feedback? Who are you receiving it from? To discuss these changes and challenges of leadership, I'm delighted to be talking with Kelli Lester, the co-founder and partner of Onyx Rising. Onyx Rising is a change management consulting firm that focuses on leaders and how they impact individual, team, and organizational behavior change. Hi, Kelli. How are you?
I'm amazing. Thank you so much, Sophie, for having me.
Well, I love that you're feeling amazing. And I always start at the beginning. You studied communications and telecommunications. What did that mean and why did you study that?
Yeah, great question. So I started out wanting to be Oprah Winfrey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wanted to have my own TV show and really have an impact on the world. So luckily, David Letterman, who went to Ball State University, had recently invested in the new telecom department. So I was part of the freshman class that went there.
Oh,
and so that
okay.
was the intent. Most people actually go to school and never work in their field, but I did for about 10 years. But the journey in undergrad was very interesting. What really started to spark something inside of me to say, okay, it's one thing to utilize your voice to have impact, but what about the kind of impact you can have to really advocate for people? And together, communications and then the work I do now really led me into this place. So I was participating in student government. I was, at the time, apartheid was really huge in South Africa, so we were organized in that way on campus. And it really made me feel of value to be able to utilize my voice. Now, my mother would say, anyone that talks as much as you do should really utilize that voice too for something good. So between my experience in college, my mother's planting the seed that don't have a mouth and it not be worth it, and really being a voice for the voiceless really became my mantra or my brand.
So you then go to work for the city of Indianapolis, and you also work for the U.S. Census Bureau. What were you doing there in terms of communications and community engagement?
First, I did a small stint at the Black newspaper in Indianapolis called the Indianapolis Recorder, and we had a TV show, and they were, at the time, just hired a new deputy mayor of neighborhoods. And so part of my job at the time was to find, based on what was in the newspaper, because we did read the newspaper back then, find guests on the show. And so during her interview, she realized that I knew so much about minority media. She actually offered me a job in the mayor's office. So I became what they call the public information officer for that particular administration, focused in on neighborhoods, minority businesses, and then also any kind of community events or community engagement, so activities. So really part of the goal was to understand the pulse of the community and then be there, and I would advance the mayor prior to any of his press conferences, particularly in the community. So I would say that between the mayor's office and then eventually the Census Bureau, my job was to look at hard to count folks within the U.S. Census. And at that particular time, we were seeing an influx of Spanish-speaking populations, particularly Hispanics, Mexicans, Cubans, et cetera, within the state of Indiana and then also Illinois and Ohio. So I had a three states technically, but Indiana was my primary. So one of the things that I think became super critical in doing that role is understanding the whys people didn't want to be counted.
Okay.
What was their fears about that? And then making sure that I understood the business needs. So we were seeing that influx within the city of Indianapolis and people not being able to purchase cars or to get aid. And so, for example, I remember one particular incident where someone actually had passed away because of a language barrier. And between that experience, I really became, I would say, doubled down on really supporting what I would call underrepresented people within any community, even if that meant style, right? So that was really important. We had a Republican mayor at the time, and he was really a great businessman. His name was Steve Goldsmith, and he taught me, anytime that telephone rings, Kelli, that's who you work for. You don't work for me. You work for the residents. And so it was a great experience that gave me some foundational understanding of the needs of the community, but also some of the fears of those communities as well.
That's a very interesting perspective that your boss had at that time in terms of how you need to be thinking, how you need to be empathizing with the person who you are listening to, coming from different backgrounds, different contexts, and just, have a different mindset and perspective that is helpful for anyone that they're working with to understand. What did that start to show you from those experiences? And then when you're at Sara Lee and Infinite, in terms of leaders, how leaders should need to be thinking about who they're leading, who they're managing, and the different perspectives that they need to be listening to be able to move the business forward effectively.
Sara Lee was a completely amazing experience in change management. So I guess I'll start out by saying it grew like many organizations grow through acquisition. Additionally, they were looked at as smaller businesses, right? So a lot of autonomy.
What you're dealing with there is mergers and acquisitions and trying to, quote, merge in different companies, which we know culturally is horribly difficult.
It's a nightmare. It is a nightmare. I would say the thing that stuck out the most from those experiences from a leadership perspective is understanding that there isn't one way to lead. There's also, like I would say, two versions of the truth, right? That two truths can exist at the same time. And
it's just how you look at it, right? not just, it is how you look at it. And that needs to be taken. And that's why empathy is so important.
Absolutely. Yes. And so to your point, the biggest thing that stuck out to me was I had a personal experience, and then I'll kind of speak to it organizationally. So at the organization, you could not move up in human resources without having field experience. If you think about it, most organizations, the headquarters is not the majority of employees, right?
Yeah.
It's the field. And so if you don't really understand who you're serving, so you oftentimes are in corporate as an internal consultant, so to speak, but if you don't really understand or didn't come from the field, then how can you truly serve them? So when you think about leadership in general, I would say that was respected. But what was the big turning point, I guess, for me, and to help me understand what other leaders needed, is I was a single mom. They were trying to promote me. I was a high potential person, and this opportunity came up in the field. It was someone from Human Resources quit the job, and they were trying to backfill it, and they needed someone that spoke at least multiple languages, English and Spanish, because of the workforce. So it was a great opportunity for me. My name came up in a room I was not in, and my boss had said, well, what about Kelli? And everyone agreed Kelli was a great, high potential person that could do it. But someone mentioned, well, she's a single mom. She can't travel. And in that moment, my boss then replied, well, let's ask her.
Which is a logical question.
Right. But it's not one that's being asked, right? Yep. Accommodations are not usually met. People usually are looking at us around what can't we do versus what we can.
And making assumptions
Yes.
without just saying, hey, look, we don't know what your situation is.
Right.
You might have a relative who can fill in and make those accommodations so that,
Exactly.
but without asking, yes.
And that's exactly what happened, Sophie. But that moment and that experience made a difference in my career. So if you want to talk about what does it look like to really lead in a way that's empathetic,
Yeah.
to lead in a way that is human-centric, that was an example of that. The other thing I guess I would share is I watched us build something as we transformed and moved everyone to headquarters and created a more integrated company. But what didn't change, unfortunately, was our biases, quite frankly, as leaders and organizationally as well. And one of the things I think that really began to make a shift in that space was our process to look at assessing individuals in the talent review.
And how did that change?
So one of the things that we did differently is we brought everyone in the conversation from multiple layers. And that really happened after my experience because it was obvious that those in the room had limited experience based on that talent. And we were beginning to see over and over again people continue to enroll for no real apparent reason. Ultimately, it was based on how connected you were to leadership. So we really created a facilitated, guided conversation where we expected people to challenge us in that dialogue. And that was a new direction. And we brought multiple layers in it. And so that was one of the ways we really chose to do that. But throughout the evolution of the change, we ended up at some point, when I started, we had 40,000 employees. When I left, it was 11,000. And I helped to lay quite a few of them off.
Oh, that's not easy.
I call it the typical business book, right, approach. Many times when organizations are publicly traded, the style of which they get to this place of a successful company usually means that they sell off those brands that didn't matter. And so it felt like people were disposable at one point to reach that goal. And so that was a huge, I signed up to be a part of an organization that was open to change, but that change was self-agenda driven. So I think in corporate organizations, when we're looking for empathy, we're looking for individuals that are willing to do the unpopular thing, say the unpopular thing, have the abrasive, if you will, abrasive conversations, hopefully not to hurt, but to really speak truth and authenticity in those. And I can tell you, through those layoffs, I've saved jobs in the process. I help people to see themselves. One HR leader said, Kelli, you're the conscience of the organization. I said, how can I be the conscience of a 40,000 person organization? But how do we truly embed that consciousness inside every leader? And that's really the plight we continue to do.
I think a couple of evolutions are at play here. One is not hiring as many people for full-time employees so that we don't do the hire, fire, but potentially hiring more people on different types of contracts, whether it is part-time or sort of flexible contracts so that they can have other clients. So they're not sort of beholden to one employer, and that gives them more stability. And that means that there's a different relationship between organizations and their sort of blended workforce. Because that allows those conversations to be different and allows that agenda to serve both sort of the employees and the company as well. You then go to the Kaleidoscope group, and that's working with a lot with external clients rather than internal clients, so to speak. What was the different way that leadership showed up for you, taking this sort of human-centric approach that is evolving at the time for you?
I found that as a consultant, many people were hiring consultants to say what they could not say, right? So I will say that, and to challenge leaders in a way that may have been a huge risk for them internally. One experience that stood out is, and by the way, it actually started internally in the consulting firm, but became an external example.
Oh, okay.
So I want to share that. So I believe that in order for my clients to win, I need the best team. And I try to demonstrate that in the way that I work. So I feel like I have good ideas, but so do you, right? So good ideas are coming from everywhere, and I've learned a lot from my client organizations. I felt that this one team member who was amazing, she was in learning and development, and I really couldn't do anything without her, but I found out that my own approach was a turnoff to her. And this became a leadership lesson for me and also
Interesting.
others. Yes.
Okay.
And so what she had met prior to me working there was what I call after work Kelly.
Okay.
And then she met when I started working as a consultant there, work Kelly. And work Kelly is to the point. She starts on time. She doesn't do a lot of the, hey, how was your weekend? Very type A personality.
You're not like chitty chatty, huh?
No, not at all. And,
Okay.
I lead with business first, and most people in the space I was in was more empathetic, I would say. So that was a muscle I had to learn. But the big thing that I noticed is she stopped talking to me. And I could not figure out why. We were in the middle of a major project with a client. So I finally asked her, I said, what's going on? What did I do? Please, I want us to work together better. Please help me understand what happened. And she said, Kelly, quite frankly, the way you show up, the way you start meetings doesn't make me motivated to want to work with you. Before you worked here, I got an opportunity to get to know you a little bit outside of work. We might go after, the client work and go for drinks. So I got to know another side of you. But the work side of you is much more abrasive, she said. Now, abrasive it was her opinion, right? But essentially, it was definitely like I didn't start meetings with this kind of very connected way and approach. And she was a person that was led by her emotions, led by her feelings more often than not. And so after she explained to me that I just jumped into work and didn't check in with her, that changed everything. So I took the feedback. I got some behaviors that she agreed to, and then we were off and running. And as a result, we became the most profitable team for any of our other clients, and a duo that was often requested because I felt like we were really the left brain and right brain. So very different styles, but it was me. I wouldn't say being the bigger person, but adapting and adjusting. And that's what leaders need to do. And so that became an example we use with clients as we were actually demonstrating what it looks like to lead inclusively.
Right. And I think for me, inclusively, empathetically, in terms of understanding, because what she needed and what you needed were very different. But then if you're working together, it really is a question of moving towards each other. But I do find those 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to kind of go, how's your dog? What's going on? Just to reconnect and make sure that we both understand, whether we're working internally or with a client, that we're on the same page, or we're on the same page, or that we sort of know each other, that if something is a little challenging to deal with, that we give each other grace. How did you change the sort of protocols really of how you were dealing with clients as leaders, but also, really sitting down and changing the way the conversations were going when you were having those client discussions and helping them take on that same approach?
Yeah. So the first thing is proactive discussions, right? So we were, and I am really big on modeling the behavior, right? So we practice what we preach, right? So even in the way we start off the relationship. So many times people run into issues and then they try to fix them. So one of the things about being proactive and inclusive as a leader is really starting out the conversation with, what does a good day look like for you? Right. And you should ask your clients that, but also your direct reports.
It can be very different, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting because until you ask those questions, you don't realize what my day looks like can be very different to yours. And what I prefer is that like just helps us understand each other.
We ask a set of questions. We adopt that in what I call client onboarding, but then we also teach those behaviors through those inclusive leaderships or training or whatever that looks like. But I think the one thing that most of us miss in this shift is the why. And so the approach to the work with clients and teaching them this is anchoring in on your why. You can do trainings all day, teach behavior, all of the things, but if people aren't connected in their gut around the why, they won't change, or it won't stay sustainable, or it won't be meaningful. And I found many times that it's the head, the heart, and the hands that actually make this work. It's the magic, right? So that means I have to understand in my head why this is important, right? I have to have a connection in my heart around the change, right? And then you can tell me what to do. Here are the specific behaviors. But when we start out trying to teach, these are the things you should do, and people haven't anchored that why, it doesn't last.
And the why is so different for different people. How do you help them connect with that why? It can be business oriented, it can be sort of emotional, but just helping them, I guess, be more self-aware, which is one of your key sort of inclusive leadership points. That self-awareness about why this matters to me.
Yeah. So I think first, when working with organizations and individuals, the why has to be organizational first. Because many of us are often, you're in the context of an organization, right?
Sure.
So for example, I'm a leader in this organization. What does leadership mean to me? What does the organization expect of me? So I think just a slight departure, I think many times people are leading people based upon their thought process and expectations versus the organization. Right?
Okay.
So I believe we have to hire for and develop for, not hoard talent, but understand it's for the organization. I think the why first starts with, what is the organizational why? Why are we even having this conversation? Why is this important? Will this make me a better leader? Is this going to help us meet goals? Is this going to help us get in new markets? So the why first starts organizationally. The harder why is your personal. I think when we see resistance in change management, it's usually when there is a lack of a personal why. So I worked with a client, a leader once, and he was very resistant to the change that we were moving forward within the organization, and it was obvious in all of his behaviors. But what really shifted him, we were talking about creating a employee experience. So that's an example of a why for the organization. We want everyone to have a positive employee experience, and most people can agree with that. But then I have to talk about who's not having it, right? And then the role that you play in creating it. And this particular leader got paired with developing a female that was new to her career, very early in her career. And through that experience, he came back to me and he said, I saw my daughter in this young woman. And so he started to connect the organizational why. Yes, we want to attract talent. Yes, we want to retain talent. Yes, we want to develop talent. But then when he saw the barriers to everyone having a similar employee experience, and he saw his daughter in that young woman, it changed everything, and he became the greatest advocate for those early in their career through that experience. And that's an example of the personal why, right? Which also connected to his heart. And then he was able to do the hands and get to work because he understood the why.
You have 7 points of leadership, helping leaders adjust to modern work, to these new ways of working. We've touched on self-awareness. There's also very much the issue of feedback, which I was talking with a client about recently. And I do find that different age groups or generations, but let's just say younger and older generations are used to feedback in very different ways. What is going to help move the needle in terms of changing the dynamics between a leader and their team members?
So I think we started the conversation by saying, asking a set of questions to each of your direct reports around what motivates them, what's a good day look like for them. I think part of those questions is, how do you like to receive feedback? And I know that seems weird, but ultimately, how you want to be rewarded might be another way of saying that.
Okay.
How do you, so we know, I think we know, we wouldn't want to do certain pieces of feedback in front of others, right? I think most people are not skilled at seeking feedback or receiving it. I think we get trained very well on how to give it, right? Oh, say something positive before you go into something more critical, but we often aren't trained to seek it. So when I first learned this tactic, I thought, oh, this behavior is easy. I do it all the time. But when they brought up seeking and receiving, I realized I didn't know how to do it. And I oftentimes didn't seek it out.
How you actually respond to the feedback. Because sometimes the fear is if I seek it out, how am I going to respond if there's negative feedback?
Yeah, and you hit it on the head. So if people come, so if we want to talk about creating innovative organizations, we have to learn how to seek and receive critical or negative feedback. And so it's critical. If we don't do that, we won't get to the good ideas. So we have to receive that feedback and say, thank you. First of all, paraphrase what you heard. I mean, we should know this, right? Paraphrase what you heard. You want to actually thank them for the feedback, because if you thank them and they brought you something difficult and you react, they will never bring it again.
For sure.
Right? And then also, I started a tactic specifically, and I encourage all my leaders to do this. I actually go to people that I know will disagree with me. Right? So if you think about it, naturally we go to our go-to people, and those people are constantly already on our side. But I found someone that thinks completely different from me, and I'm seeking that feedback out on a regular basis. So the goal here is practice, 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 right? Find that naysayer, that person that thinks differently than you, and seek out that feedback. Appreciate the feedback when it's given. Paraphrase it, right? All of those tips are critical. I think when it comes to this across lines of difference is where it becomes difficult. So we think we're doing something well, but if we seek that divergent opinion, then we'll really know, right? I even suggest people to leaders to ask for a performance review. I know organizations do 360s and all of that's nice and formal, but if you really want to know how you're showing up, ask. Right? And if you make it a habit as a leader to start asking, how am I doing? Heck, in your own relationships, right? With your partners, how's it going? How am I doing? What could I do better? Right? And then receive that without defense. So this is easier said than done.
For sure.
I think there's also ways to do it anonymously from the team to create safety in that space, which I think is also important as a leader. And then not wait to do it just 2 or 3 times a year.
Absolutely. And I think these check-ins, which are happening much more often because we're moving at such a pace, so that we can't sort of be waiting a long time, and having that more coaching relationship with leaders, I think really does help, having that ongoing feedback so it doesn't seem as dramatic. I interviewed a gentleman, Mehmet Baha, which was all about psychological safety. And he was talking to me about the fact that it really starts off, or a foundation perhaps of it, is about being able to share mistakes. And so that goes to that feedback. So if we have that, the trust, we have the empathy, I'm sharing, I've asked maybe for feedback, you're giving it to me, you're telling me I've done something wrong. And then I have to also speak up and say, well, these are some of the things that I could have done better, and have that positive loop so that we can have psychological safety between us if we're working on the same team. How do you help help leaders create that psychological safety for sharing mistakes, for people to encouraging them, and then it's part of that feedback loop, but it's also so important both for that innovation, so people are sharing their ideas, and also for sharing their mistakes too, that risk tolerance.
I really encourage leaders to be vulnerable. Leadership and it's, to me, it's old news for people like you and I, but if you start to think about our history from like the 90s on, the leader was expected to have all the answers, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that command and control was very acceptable. People were trained as team members to show that level of reverence and never disagree, right? So
Right.
you have to create a commonplace that your direct reports or others can disagree with you. You also have to create spaces where they can anonymously give insight and input.
Right.
And then you have to show some examples. For example, if someone in your organization, we hear people differently just based sometime up on their level, right?
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
so we have to actually show and amplify those diverse voices. But I believe vulnerability is the key. The minute I showed a chink in my armor is the minute I realized how my team would take a bullet for me. And prior to that, trying to live up to this level of perfection, which I would say women often in particular do.
We do.
Right?
It is
so
true.
to be imperfectly perfect, right? And not afraid. And to do that, not just in front of your team, but to do that in other spaces,
Yep.
it shows the kind of leader you are, right?
Yep.
But after you've demonstrated that for a period of time, then your team will communicate the kind of leader you are. There was this quote that he who is a leader or she who is a leader should have people following them, right? So if you look behind you and there's no one with this willingness, before I was even given the title of people leader, people were following me, right? So that's an indicator. So if
Sure.
people are not operating in that way, they're not picking up and trying, they don't feel empowered around you, those are signs that you need to do some introspection around what kind of leader do you really want to be? How do I really want to show up?
How do you encourage leaders to, at the very top of organizations, but also managers at different levels of organizations, to have that greater emotional intelligence in how they're managing people and empathy in terms of how they're speaking?
I talk a lot about exposure being the first step, right? So
Okay.
exposure to difference is critical. Many times people are navigating the world thinking everything is set up the same way for everyone. And until you actually sit with, and I think a few years ago we would say, oh, sometimes you just need to sit with it, right? I feel like it was an overused phrase and buzzword, but it's a reality, right? But
Right.
where are you sitting? Right? If you're
Yeah.
not, if you're still sitting in a place that's comfortable, if you're still sitting in a place that doesn't look like what your team members are sitting with, it's hard to really understand. I know we talk
Sure.
about this simplicity of taking off my shoes and putting on someone else's, but
Yeah.
I don't feel like as leaders we spend enough time being exposed, and that may need to
Agreed.
shift as your team dynamics shift, right? So you may have team members that are all over the world, right? So are you
Right.
actually, there's nothing that will take away from spending that time.
The US, for example, each state is so different.
Yes.
So just trying to understand, I'm sitting here in New York. What about somebody in Nebraska? What is their lived experience every day? Everybody has such a different environment and, their local experiences and local community. Put that in context when we're having a conversation, a team that is, talking across many different office locations. That kind of sensitivity, or just at least taking a pause and sort of saying, well, are they experiencing things the same way I am?
Yeah, I have a model that I talk a lot about. So exposure,
Yep.
inclusion, and then you also want to spend time just understanding. So to me,
Right.
and I'll give you and then the last is disrupt. So
Okay.
that means you need to disrupt exclusion, right? So once again, exposure, make some new friends, get in new spaces, see what it's like to live in someone else's shoes. And then within inclusion, I think for me, it's around, I call it 2D, which is there's lived experience And then there's also that experience that you acquire. So, for example, I worked with a hospital, and some of the doctors that were there had experience in other countries. And that experience that they brought with them by immersing themselves in a different culture really helped them to work across lines of difference when caring for patients. And so when you're including, you want to take under consideration those that are from different backgrounds, but you also want to really look at that acquired experience and respect that as well. But I would say those are critical. And then I think when you are in that space of exposure, are you truly understanding the perspective? And part of that means we have to empty out or unlearn certain aspects that we may have learned. And then disrupting, I think, is easier for leaders because we have agency, a little bit more difficult for those that are lower in the organization. So those are the steps to me to really get at creating, I always get, well, what should I do, Kelly? What should I do? First step, make new friends.
The last point I'd love to go to is this innovation piece of it, which is so critical, and I can't believe we haven't got to it yet. But there's always so much to talk to about leadership and how it's changing. So innovation. Companies are dealing with some of the most challenging, well, certainly the fastest pace developments, technology developments, AI integrating, people having to work in different ways, their jobs are changing, the skills that they're needing to acquire. How do you help leaders tackle creating the environment, helping their team members have the mindset to innovate in the environment that we're in right now? It's not easy. It really isn't. And so what are the key things that you help them understand, and then also for nurturing and supporting their team?
The first component is the value of innovation. So what I hear and see in cultures is they talk about it as a second or third thing. I don't think they believe in it, right? I don't
really?
think, no, I think they want the outcome and don't know how, right?
All right. Okay. Fair enough.
And then it's also this concept of, is it the flavor of the month? So one thing you didn't ask, but I think is a big part or embedded in your questions, is certain industries are much better at this than others, right?
Fair enough.
So I work with a lot of financial services industries, and innovation isn't even the goal, right? They may say like, hey, we're just trying to modernize the utilization, or they think it's through technology, right? So I say that, and then you have industries like in tech, that are much more, or even media, right? That we embrace the different. I recall coming up in that industry, and we were dealing with tattoos well before the rest of the world was dealing with it. And so I think it's one, what do we value? Do we really believe in it? And that anchor up against the organization. But then when it comes to an individual leader, I actually have to look at, based on that industry, are you a risk averse, organization or not? So that the one thing I guess I didn't share is the why is either the carrot or the stick. Right. So more innovative companies see it as the carrot. If I do this, then we'll get here. Right. Where the stick is, if I don't do this, this will happen. We will get fined. And so sometimes how you frame innovation will make a difference. And then the specific strategies around getting at that innovation for me, have been successfully think tanks. And actually setting up those think tanks connected to what I call experience think tanks. So many times organizations will value those people that have expertise in a particular area, but they don't necessarily reward when ideas come from those areas. So one of the things I've really been dealing with,
which seems counterintuitive.
I know, right? But at the end of the day, innovation think tanks have been one of the most successful approaches when I've worked with clients, where they've tapped into that, and then making sure that those think tanks are diverse from levels,
Sure.
obviously not from functions, because that's the way we were setting those up. But that's been a big success for even those financial services organizations. There's also a huge value in younger generations being more nimble with it. So allowing them to find a company problem that we really want to solve, leaders participating in that, putting that problem out there, and then allowing the different groups to solve them, and then rewarding innovation. But oftentimes what I see is that it's a muscle. And it's something that they haven't exercised. So we'll talk about it, but don't know how to actually behave in that way. And we don't have any infrastructure or accountability or rewards and incentives put in place. Because if you tell a leader, this is what good leadership looks like, you integrate it into your performance management, you have ways to reward that behavior, then you'll see more and more of it.
Fantastic. And normally I ask someone a couple of things you can take away. You already have seven leadership traits for inclusive and innovative leadership. So we already have those, and those will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Kelli, for everything you shared and your insights and all that you're doing to help leaders navigate in a very different environment that we're really trying to adapt to modern work and all the different changes that are ongoing every day. It's really not easy. So I really appreciate sharing what you've learned and what you're doing.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you for the work you've been doing for many years.
Thanks again so much to Kelli Lester, co-founder and partner at Onyx Rising. You can find out more about Kelli on LinkedIn, as well as go to the website onyx2rising, ONYX2RISING.com, where you can find Kelli's 7 leadership traits. Immediate action tip. Modern leadership traits include self-awareness, seeking out, giving and receiving feedback, and promoting psychological safety. If you are finding the new business and work environment hard to navigate, contact me for board advice, executive mentorship, courses, and workshops that enable multi-generational distributed leaders, managers, and teams to up-level and scale rapidly in the modern work environment and be ready for whatever lies ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You can also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated, useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for watching. Until next time.